let me explain first why EQ trumps IQ. So, our IQ, all of that happens in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, the rational mind. Well, when we're stressed, when we're experiencing big emotions like frustration, overwhelm, burnout, our rational brain checks out. So, you can't utilize your IQ if you don't know how to control and manage your EQ.
Welcome to yourbrilliance.com. I'm your host, Amy Waterman. So imagine this. You are out in public with your kid when suddenly your kid just flips out, right? It's a complete meltdown and everyone is staring at you and you're embarrassed and you're mad and your kid will not be quiet. And you end up reacting in a way that you later regret. Is there any parent out there who has not had that happen to them? Yeah. So our kids have really big emotions, and sometimes they go off in really inappropriate places. So as parents, it's up to us to teach our kids how to manage their emotions. But many of us were never taught that ourselves. Schools are great at training young minds, but they completely ignore young hearts, which is unfortunate because we now know that EQ, which is emotional intelligence, has been found to predict success just as much as IQ. That's why we are talking today to Brittney-Nichole Connor-Savarda, who is the founder of Catalyst for Change and Generation EQ. She is the authority on emotional intelligence and the author of the book, The EQ Deficiency: How Emotional Intelligence and Compassion Can Cure an Emotional Pandemic, Solve Our People Problems, and be a catalyst for positive change. She has a ton more resources for parents. And as a parent myself, I am very excited to hear what she has to share with us. Welcome, Brittney-Nichole.
Hi, Amy. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so I want to start out because many of us did not grow up knowing that there was such a thing as emotional intelligence, right?
Mm-hmm.
We just knew about IQ. So for those of us who aren't familiar with the term, what actually goes into EQ?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm going to start out by saying heart and soul, because we can talk about Daniel Goleman's elements of emotional intelligence, which are amazing, by the way: self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, motivation, social skills, right? So those are the ones Daniel Goleman identified. But if we don't put our heart and soul into it, none of those are going to stick. And that is what I tell every parent is you have to have compassion, and not just for your child, but for yourself. And so when we talk about the elements of emotional intelligence, self-awareness is the foundation, because like you were saying before, none of us were taught anything about how to be emotionally intelligent. What is it? And so many of us were handed scripts for how to act, how to behave, what to say, what not to say, what to feel, what not to feel. And so in order to be emotionally intelligent, we have to be aware of who we really are, what we want, what we're feeling, and be able to disconnect from all of those social scripts that really are not serving us.
And I can automatically see where it becomes difficult as a parent, because if you weren't taught that, and if your parents weren't socially maybe self-aware, if they didn't help you, lead you through identifying your emotions, how in the world can you then teach that to your kid?
Yeah. And that's why I call it a pandemic within itself, because it's passed down from generation to generation, and it's no one's fault. No one can fault themselves for not being emotionally intelligent and not knowing how to teach that to their children, because most parents, even though they don't want to be like their parents, they'll say, I'll never do that. They tend to do as they were taught, whether they want to or not, because it's just ingrained in us, right? So we have to break away from those indoctrinations and those scripts.
So one of the things that really surprised me when I was looking at this research is that they're finding that EQ matters as much as IQ. And again, that's just not what I was taught growing up. You know, what matters was your test scores, and that was it. So dive into that a little bit further. How can EQ change our lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me explain first why EQ trumps IQ. So our IQ, all of that happens in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, the rational mind. Well, when we're stressed, when we're experiencing big emotions like frustration, overwhelm, burnout, our rational brain checks out. So you can't utilize your IQ if you don't know how to control and manage your EQ. So that is why it is more important. Yeah. Wow. It's pretty amazing. So someone with an average IQ, but that has a high EQ, outperforms those with a very high IQ by 80% of the time, just because of that. Yeah. It's mind-blowing.
Which makes me think about our kids at school, right? And all of the emotional stuff they go through at school, but all they're getting is, here's your math test, here's your reading. And they're not necessarily getting that help with emotions. Do you think our schools have a role to play in teaching this?
So as someone whose first major was early childhood education, teachers are so overwhelmed right now as it is. And anyone who is teaching EQ, again, I talk about heart and soul put into this. If the person teaching it does not embody and embrace the elements of emotional intelligence, it's not going to stick. And unfortunately, even in our educational systems, we are taught to teach information, not to teach transformation by transforming ourselves into that person. So it's a really tough question. I think it would be great. I think it would be wonderful to see this implemented in the education system. But with the current structure that it's under today, the way that it's set up, I don't think it would be as effective as it should and could be.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right that teachers have so much to deal with already. I think it would need a lot of support and a lot of funding, and probably right now that's not the right thing to ask of our schools. So let's go back to the parents then, because we know we can reach the parents. So when I think about what I was taught about emotions growing up, it was really simple. Like, my job was to always be happy. And if I was anything else, like if I was angry, if I was upset, if I was frustrated, I was bad. And my job was to go to my room to kind of get control of myself and see the error of my ways. And then I could come out and be with everyone else again. So that was my lesson. Yeah. What would you suggest that parents today, what different lessons should they be teaching their kids about emotions?
I love this question. Thank you so much for asking. Because same with me, right? And I think it was just, if we're a good kid, then our parents aren't as stressed out. And again, it goes back to that social script of this is what is expected and this is what is acceptable. But I would tell parents to teach their children to become friends with their emotions. See them as teachers, and even the unpleasant ones. That's the thing. Like, even emotions like frustration and anger, we should get comfortable with them because they're sending information to us. They're trying to tell us something. They're trying to tell us something that something's not right. And we need to pay attention to that and be curious. And then regarding happiness, so happiness is an emotion. It's not a state of being. And instead of trying to get your kid to be happy all the time or not to feel those unpleasant emotions, say, wow, I see that you're feeling this really strong, unpleasant emotion. Let's kind of figure out what it's telling us so we can process that emotion, get over it, and then get into a more productive state so we can feel content, secure, strong, and confident. Right? We have to go through our emotions. We have to be able to process all of them.
I remember talking to you earlier about the fact, though, that, and this happens to me too, that as parents, we take our kids' negative emotions so personally. So like, if my daughter isn't happy, I think this is my fault. I have to fix it, right? And so I think comes back to what you were saying about parents needing to be able to model emotional intelligence themselves, because if we don't, we're going to take all of our kids' emotions personally, and then we're going to react in ways that aren't emotionally intelligent.
100%. 100%. Yeah, it starts with you as the parent, again, being that model for them. And it's okay to, like, if you make a mistake, if you are low on energy one day and you find yourself reacting and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I shouldn't have done that. I feel terrible." Own that emotion and talk with your children about that. Say, "Man, I feel really upset that I yelled at you. And this is what I was feeling. And this is why I reacted. And that's not okay. This is what the need was behind that. This was my concern. This was my fear." Talk through that with them so they understand that it's okay to talk about your emotions. And it's, model being sorry, model being humble. That's one of the best teachers for sure.
And that is so hard, again, when we look back at our parents, just the generation. It's not our individual parents, it's the culture in which they were raised. You never apologize to your kid. And I think that's been one of the most beautiful things I've seen as a parent, is what happens when I apologize to my daughter, is that instead of rupturing our connection and her seeing me as, gosh, mom makes mistakes and I don't respect her anymore, what actually happens is we feel so much more connected. And I think that really surprised me as a parent. I didn't expect that.
Yeah. And when you apologize, right, it's not just to say you're sorry. Again, this goes back to how we were taught, if we do something wrong, say you're sorry, that's supposed to make everything better. And that's not how it works. Because if you truly don't feel sorry, then what's going to happen? You're probably going to do it again. And then you say, sorry, that's supposed to fix everything. And it becomes this pattern. And then sorry means nothing, right? So it's all about really owning that and saying, what could I do next time that might be better? Can you help me work through this? Right?
Yeah, it's so, we keep going back to us having to do that work first. So one of the big surprises for me as a parent was children's emotions are just so raw and they're so uncensored and they're just so in your face.
Yeah.
And I don't think I had realized until I confronted actually raw, genuine emotion, how much I had learned to hide my own emotions. So somewhere in my brain, I had gained this message that if you're an adult, you never let people see how you feel. That's just not socially appropriate. And of course, in so many situations, it isn't socially appropriate to show how you feel. So the question that I always struggle with is, how do you find that balance between letting your kids express their authentic, uncensored emotions and teaching them what's appropriate?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. So it has to do with ages and stages, right? Because what is appropriate for a toddler is going to be different for, a 7-year-old or a teenager. And so a toddler, they haven't developed control yet over their emotions. They don't know how to process things the same way that we do. So they just explode, right? Everything comes out all at once. They have no control over how much they release at a time. But what so many parents want to do is put a lid on that pressure cooker when the steam is just shooting out of it. And I think of a balloon. So if you've ever blown a balloon and you pull the sides and it releases that really high pitched shrill squeak because you're trying to slowly release the air out instead of letting it go and the balloon goes flying all around the room. That balloon is your toddler in essence. So sometimes it's good to just let that balloon go because it's going to last far much longer. That shrill screaming is going to last much longer if we try to control them. They just need to let it out. Now, that's easier said than done, right? Because if you're in a public space in the grocery store and your kid is losing it, then you may feel beads of sweat start to pop out on your forehead. You may be looking around who's watching me? Oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening to me. But the thing is, you have to ask yourself, why is it bothering you so much? Because this is natural, right? And again, it goes back to understanding your own emotions. Why do I feel embarrassed? What is this saying about me as a parent, or how do I perceive that? How do I view other people? But that's another subject in itself. So in regards to toddlers, when they're experiencing that emotion, even if it's in public, You want to just let them get it all out. And you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I feel comfortable with that. And this is what I recommend to parents. Give them choices. Do you want to scream it out in a pillow? I see you're feeling this really strong emotion right now. Do you want to scream it out into a pillow, or do you want to stomp it out? And let them choose. And what they're doing is they're releasing that energy in a way that they feel comfortable. And then it's done. You're not saying don't behave that way, because if you keep doing this, then this is going to happen, then what you're doing is compiling that stress on top of them. Now they're not just upset about what they're already crying and screaming about. Now they're worried about the consequences of feeling that emotion, right?
Yeah.
So it does more harm than good when we try to suppress it.
Yeah.
But, when you deal with an older child, then you can say, I see you're feeling a strong emotion. Here's some options. Here's what we need to do. Most of older kids don't react that way anyways in public. They don't have a full-blown temper tantrum. But that's why developing emotional intelligence at such a young age is important, because through these stages, you teach them when you're going to feel this. These are some ways we can handle it. You're already working them through that, right? And so with an older child, it may be, when we get home, let's have a conversation about this. I see you're upset about something, or let's journal about it, or let's go to your calming corner. There's so many different ways to handle it. And I can give you some great resources if you want to provide it for your viewers and listeners, that they can look at all these different ages and stages.
Yeah. So we will be putting all that information in the show notes, so make sure to take a look. So one of the things that occurs to me is that emotional intelligence is even harder to come by now than before because of this dependence on technology, right? So especially in the last few years when our kids were spending so much screen time because they were home, they were under lockdown. But even before that, I think once all these teenagers got their smartphones, suddenly that's where they're spending all of their time. They're not spending as much time interacting with people. They don't have that face-to-face education, right? Because when we talk to people and we interact with other people, we are constantly learning. When we say this happens, there's a lot more going on there. So my question to you is, do you think technology is the reason that we have such an EQ deficiency today?
Yeah, so this is a very complicated answer. It's not as simple as saying, is this the reason, right? I definitely think that it has exacerbated the deficiency. I don't think it's the reason we have it. I believe, a lot of people ask, do you think that older generations are more emotionally intelligent? And I say no. And Joshua Freeman, the founder of 6 Seconds, or the CEO of 6 Seconds, will tell you that all of their research they conducted across the board, people are about at the same level of emotional intelligence. And it's a pretty low level, by the way. So what you see is older generations that did have that more face-to-face engagement. They were more polite. They knew what to say, when to say it, right? And then guess what? They go to the hair salon, and what happens? Gossip. After church luncheons, gossip. You come home and I remember as a kid, there was so much gossip. Did you know what so-and-so did? And did you know this? So I believe that it's just transformed our lack of genuine interest and connection to people. That's my perspective. It's morphed. But I think it's always been there because things like technology, politics, money, all of these things are inherently neither good nor bad. Right? They're neutral. All they do is showcase how we use them, right? So if we use them for good, they're going to do great things. If we're disconnected, then they're just going to exacerbate that disconnection. Yeah. Now that's my theory, but I definitely don't think it's helping.
An entire book about this. Tell us about the EQ deficiency.
Yeah, so I wrote this last year before the pandemic hit, because there was just so much on the news about social media and politics, and everybody's pointing fingers at different people. And I'm like, no. It's not this, it's not that is the problem. And so in my book, it's a 3-part book. And the first part of the book is talking about just what we discussed. What is the source of this deficiency in emotional intelligence? Why do we have it? Why do we see all of these things happening in our modern society, like increased stress and anxiety and violence and divide, especially in politics, right? And it all goes back to the source. And that's what we tend to overlook as a society, is the source of our problems. We want to identify and treat the symptoms, but it's just like weeds in your yard. If you just pull from the top and don't get the roots, then it's going to keep coming back. And so the first part is identifying the source. The second part is understanding ourselves so we can develop that awareness so that we can build this emotional intelligence and correct for this problem. And then the whole correcting part is the third part of the book. So it is definitely my passion project for sure.
And you don't just have this book. You've got so much other stuff. You've got your website, which is Generation EQ. And this is really cool. You have a YouTube channel and you've got a parenting series on there called Wednesdays Parenting with Emotional Intelligence. So tell us about all the other things that you offer parents.
Yeah, so Parenting with Emotional Intelligence, I started, it's fairly new. I think I have like 10 or 11 episodes right now, and I do it every other Wednesday on my podcast as well. And I just try to help parents implement emotional intelligence because it is so crucial to get in at a young age. But it's never too late. I want to throw that out there. And then on Generation EQ, you can find a couple resources. So I'm starting Generation EQ Parents Club, which is a monthly session with me. I facilitate it. It's, I think, 90 minutes. And so you actually get to ask me questions. We pick a topic together to discuss. And then you also can add on to that and get extra things like in-person meet and greets if you're in the Charlotte area, or social events for parents. But everything's around emotional intelligence. And then that is also recorded. So you get those resources if you can't make a session. And then I also do private one-on-one family sessions because every family is different. Every family has unique needs, ages and stages of kids, your upbringing. So I offer private family sessions as well.
Wonderful. Now, for those of you watching, the first place you need to start is you need to immediately go on over to Brittney-Nichole's YouTube channel. You need to check out this free parenting series. And there's so much more information, but I think that is the first place for you to go. Yeah. Where do you go? You go to yourbrilliance.org/EQKids. That's yourbrilliance.org/EQKids. Thank you so much, Brittney-Nichole, for coming onto the show. And I wondered if you had any last message you would like to leave our viewers with.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amy. It was an absolute pleasure. I hope that I provided some insight and some helpful tips for parents, for those of you watching or listening. And the last thing that I would say is just, have that compassion and love for yourself. Because one thing that I found developing my emotional intelligence is that when we have that self-love and compassion for ourselves, it's much easier to give that to others. And our kids need us to give that to them. Now I have to disclose this. I'm not a parent yet, right? So when I say our kids, that's like me saying futuristically, but they need us to take care of ourselves because it's like the oxygen mask on the plane. You have to put yours on first, right?
That is so true. And as a parent myself, I completely agree. We definitely need to give ourselves some compassion because it's a hard job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And don't feel guilty, right? Like, don't feel guilty about anything. All parents have good intentions. It's all about that growth, growing with your child and learning from your past experiences.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much, Brittney-Nichole. And thank you out there for watching. Now, what was your biggest insight or aha moment while watching this interview? If you feel comfortable, share it with us in the comments. And for more interviews like these, make sure to subscribe to Your Brilliance TV here on YouTube. And then come on over to yourbrilliance.com for more tips and insights on how you can live your most brilliant life. See you next time.